Hey, Sam. Hey, everyone. We'll wait another moment to get people on. I've received a few email comments, updates, mainly to the key findings section of the document. So I've started to copy and paste those into the working document for today, just so we can have those. Paul, I wasn't able to get to the one you just sent, but your version from yesterday, I believe, is more or less incorporated into the document, so we can track it for our conversation for today. And I think once Brian's audio connects, we'll get going. All right. Thanks everyone for being here. We'll go ahead and get started. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, seeing thumbs up. Thank you. So I think I'm going to pull up the agenda for today, but generally the goal for today is to let the group really kind of determine where the discussion goes. I have certainly a few kind of highlighted sections of our document that we have to work on, but my ask is that everyone's kind of careful reading of the document so far lets us guide the discussion to where we really need to focus our efforts, so that we're not spending too much time on areas that we don't need as much work. I did want to just briefly point out, we don't have a lot of time left for discussion on kind of getting this document together. We have less than a month before our last subcommittee meeting opportunity to review this. So if we're meeting, weekly, we might have 4 more meetings. So I just wanted to put that into everyone's minds. So we want to come to these meetings prepared and ready to discuss. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the list for today. So on the agenda, I noted a few kind of areas that need discussion, and I'm guessing that the subcommittee will focus our efforts to those, but I just listed those in bullet points on the agenda so we don't lose track of them. And generally, I'll let Sam open up if you have anything you'd like us to consider as we dive into the discussion today.
Thanks for the opportunity, but no, go for it.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pull up the version I have. If anybody else heard me earlier, I just mentioned that comments that are received between the last kind of email I sent out with the kind of current revision document. Any comments I received on that, I've been starting to plop them into this working document that we'll be using today. And then at the end of the meeting today, I'll just send that snapshot out for the group to consider. So we'll keep everything tracked and everyone will be kind of apprised of the changes. So I'll go ahead and pull that up on my screen. Sorry, just a sec. And generally the page numbering is going to be off. I'm working from like the full work group document, and the main goal is the formatting in that big document is just so there's just a lot to kind of reformat. So I'm going to try to kind of keep this as my working document so I don't have to copy and paste a bunch of different versions. But generally, when you send in subcommittee reports, I'm going to be looking at those versions, copying, pasting any changes into the doc in the track changes format. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll up. I'm just going to make sure everyone can see this table of findings with a big yellow highlight. Is everyone looking at that? Okay, excellent. I'm going to zoom in. I went ahead and highlighted some of the table of finding items that are kind of similar in nature that we're going to want to try to trim down and figure out which which version of things to go with. But I want to open it up to the room. The main question of the day is we have all these edits, all these comments on the document, and the goal is what needs to be worked on today. And the idea is at the end of the day, we should have a bunch of items that are still in progress, still in track changes. And then the goal is for the rest of the items that weren't covered, weren't tagged as to-dos, are going to be kind of accepted in terms of the red line track changes. Those won't be permanent. Obviously, we can revisit those, but we're just trying to clean up the document so we can work from it moving forward. All right, so with that, please, where should we focus our attention today? I see Paul's unmuted, and then we have Ken's hand.
Yeah, sorry, Ken. I just wanted to point out to everyone that this reformatting of the table of findings and kind of grouping it into categories was my suggestion. I was just trying to bring some order to our findings, trying to break down what topics we had really addressed in terms of findings, which ones we hadn't, just to try to make it clear. And this also gives us a chance, I think, as Mark Eager had suggested at one point, to prioritize our findings rather than just have them listed in numerical order in which they showed up in the document. So that's the background for this kind of global change here. That's all.
Thanks, Paul. And I did want to note, I've put the kind of headings for each major section. I haven't prioritized those per Paul's suggestion that he sent in to everyone quite yet. The main issue is I didn't want to lose track of like the order of findings too much, but I've started to kind of compile things in similar groupings. Like you see here, we see some recently submitted content here, a couple versions of the same finding, like a couple versions of 31. And the idea is I just wanted to group those so we can kind of talk about them all at the same time. But still work in progress to get up to Paul's version of kind of the prioritized aspect of it. All right. So yeah, Ken.
Yeah, it seems to me that I don't know that we should jump right into the table of findings. It seems to me like we should look at the document itself because the findings are derived from the document. And we have a clear situation in the document in section 3 where there are competing versions. And so there's been an email chain about that. And we don't often get to this part of the document because we tend to start at the top and then we run out of time before we can get to the bottom. So it just seems to me like there seems to be kind of an overriding major issue to be for us to decide here. So anyway, I just want to put that forward as being where we should start.
Thanks, Ken. That works for me. So we're on section 3 here. Anywhere in particular, we have quite a few items in here that are kind of multiple versions. But if there's anywhere you want to start out, we can start there.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that we need to start out with is, we have two versions, two iterations of essentially the same thing. So just to go back in time a little bit, there were there was a list expansion that I did where I took the list that we had been working with in the work group, and then I put a little explanation about what each item was, and then I put a little characterization of what effects it would have upon the life of the landfill. So that's that's what I'll call the original version. So for the draft version, there appeared another version, clearly derived from the original version. And it has much of the same sorts of mechanics in it, but it really looks at the same items, you know, with a different spin put upon them. And so I'm not even sure exactly who's the author of that. Yeah. So that would be a characteristic of what I'll call the alternate version, or the alternate list items, is what you've got on the screen now. Right. And it has the you know, the shortens landfill life, lengthens landfill life. It has that sort of symbology you know, in it. So I guess the first question is, where did this alternate version come from?
Yeah, that alternate version was my suggestion on how to sort of expand on the discussion that you had submitted.
Okay.
Any suggestions on how to approach this? Which version you like more? What elements work best for you?
Well, I think we need to kind of hang on a bit before we go to that, right? Because, you know, I will, it seems like the etiquette of you know, the etiquette of this work group so far has been to you know, to when an author submits material, there are comments on that material. But this is kind of an entirely different approach, and it wasn't really presented as, you know, this is an alternate to that. Instead, it appeared on top of that, and it pushed the original version down.
So do you want
So-
the original version on top? Is that your suggestion?
Well, no, I'm just going back to what the process should have been, right? The process should have been comments to the original version, not another version appearing. And it didn't appear like, oh, this is an alternate version to that. There was no discussion about that. I don't even know, you know, I didn't even know who actually created it or where it came from, any of that sort of thing. So there just seems to me to be a departure from the, like I said, the etiquette, you know, of what we're doing. And certainly, you know, as an author, I felt disrespected by this approach that was taken. So Ginger, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, Ken, I'm just trying to kind of jump in behind you, so keep going if you have more to say, because I was looking at this document over the weekend, and I think you and I are talking roughly about the same pages. I'm struggling to understand which version we are supposed to be looking at. And I think it's the same section that you're talking about, Ken. I don't know for sure, but if I'm looking at like what's labeled like page 60, let's say, in the subcommittee report, there's a whole bunch of red text, and it has one arrow going this way for decreased lifespan, and then one going, you know, the other way, and then an X. And then if I go below that, down to roughly page, I've got to scroll through here, sorry. Roughly page, I don't know, 71, it looks like it's the same information, but presented differently with slightly different wording. And so I don't know. And there's a name authored on here that I don't know, Maren Shermer. And so I'm trying to figure out who put what where, and what the general consensus of the subcommittee is that we're working off of.
Sure.
So I know how to respond, because I don't want to respond to a version that is the incorrect version, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Ginger. So I'm going to comment briefly. I'm going to try to squash this. I think we really don't have a ton of time to talk about the process piece, so I'll get into it as best as we can. So Ken's right. Ken submitted this blue events and factors with potential lifetime impact. He had these arrows. I did in fact comment on those as Ken suggested. And then I also submitted my own version of how to approach this section. Those two things are allowed to happen simultaneously. Authors are allowed to submit different information as well as comment on existing information. That was the approach here. To answer Ginger's question, it's all up for discussion. All the content from all the subcommittee members, you know, we're not focused on one part of a submission from a specific subcommittee member. And the challenge here, and this is not unique to this section at all, is that there are multiple versions of the same or similar content. And we're asking ourselves, how should we approach this section? How should we approach this content? So generally, in terms of what should go on top, to Ken's comment earlier, the intention is not to bury anything. I think we have a lot of content here, so I'm happy to move that. But we do have to, kind of move forward and accept that, we're going to have multiple versions of the same or similar content. But I do also highly encourage folks to comment on the content that's there if, that can be edited or altered.
Darren or Daniel, can one of you sort of walk me through what the differences are between the two? Because I'm not understanding that. I don't know if it's wordsmithing or if there's a fundamental difference between the two.
Sure. Yeah, go for it, Ken.
Yeah. So first of all, like I have been saying, there is indeed a process difference, right, about how this has been treated. And Daniel may want to kind of gloss over that, but I can just tell you, as the original author, I feel disrespected, by the way that this has been handled. Essentially, for it to appear, I don't even know who produced it, and it has been indeed spun in ways that I'll get into in just a moment. But Daniel, could you just scroll up, I think, just a little bit up on the screen the way we've got it? Yeah, stop right there. So I can see in the middle of the screen there's the word additional that's been added there. Who added that?
I did.
When we started this process, right? I'm talking about the entire work group process here. I seem to remember comments by Darren and I think by our facilitator about the fact that staff was here to kind of expedite the process and assist with the process, but we're not going to actually be driving the process. And it just seems like that I don't feel that that's being honored here. I brought these items up. I made this thing, in good faith, and I don't feel like they have been treated in good faith. So I'm going to say that there is an ethical component to essentially the two different versions. So that would be the first thing I would say. So, and don't interrupt me, please. So I'm just bringing that up as one of the differences between the two. That one came first and kind of it was certainly open to be commented on, to have things talked about, as to, well, it seems to be lacking this or it seems to be lacking that. But those comments did not, as a matter of fact, come forward until just recently. It more or less sat untalked about. And also, like I said, it never came about in the actual us having discussions, right? Because we never quite got down to that far in the agenda. It would always start at the top again. So now if we look at the comments, the changes that have been made themselves, the main thing that's happened is that the original version really talks about the shortening or lengthening landfill life having to do with the baseline. So we have a baseline that we've established. And so there are certain changes which are possible to the baseline, which have to do with essentially the intake cap that the 2020 franchise agreement, has placed on how much garbage comes into the landfill. So for example, certain things that can happen could shorten landfill life, but really they just bring it up to the baseline. They don't go beyond that because there's a limit. All of the mention of the limit has been eliminated in the alternate version. So it for a number of things, it just says, for example, that if the landfill owner decides to take in more garbage, they can take in more garbage. And if they decide not to take in more garbage, then they won't take in that garbage. There's no mention whatsoever that there's actually a cap operating. But that is fundamental to the entire discussion about, that's the baseline that we're essentially working with. I mean, that's the material that the Republic brought forward. And so we're working with that. So that's one change. And then another change has been, whereas I had grouped things where I just said, these are the things which can actually shorten landfill life, either to the baseline or beyond the baseline, depending on kind of what they are. These are the things that could lengthen landfill life. The alternate version takes those items and kind of tries to clump them together so that for each item, there's like, well, this could be this way, this could lengthen it or this could shorten it. And as a matter of fact, there's kind of boilerplate language that is applied to each one. And so it doesn't give you any idea, it doesn't give you any context about what exactly are those elements that would actually influence whether it's going to go this way, that way, or both ways, or what is indeed going to happen. So those would be the primary differences that I would say between the two. What I think should be done, of course, is for us to actually do this a collaborative way instead of a competitive way, which would be to start with the original version and then make comments about it and then proceed from there.
All right, thanks, Ken. Any other comments? Any suggestions? Yeah, Chuck.
Thank you, Daniel. Just for clarification, is what's the original and what's the second one? You're bouncing that back and forth so much that I'm not sure what the original is and what the second one is. Just for uniformity, to go forward, we need to really get on one page is what I'm saying. This is bouncing back and forth and there's no clarity for the last 5 minutes what is what.
Thanks, Chuck. Yeah, this blue highlighted piece is the Ken's submission, the original, if that's helpful.
So Daniel, do you suggest that we look at both and offer comments on both, or what is your best recommendation how we proceed from this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you should probably consider all the material that has been submitted by subcommittee members. So Ken's material in blue, the material that I submitted above, you can consider both. If the idea is that you just don't like one of the versions, you don't have to consider them. You can say, look, I don't like the approach of this version. I do think that kind of reading them for content, reading them for what works and what doesn't, and in Ken's verbiage, the sort of collaborative approach of kind of adding on if it makes sense within kind of how that is structured, I think that would be a great way to go about it. But it's really kind of up to you as to how to do these comments. We have, yeah, go for it.
I'm sorry, Daniel, when you hovered over the text, there was more there. Like if you hover over the text, a box popped up, in other words.
I think so. The box is just saying that.
Is that a completely different version? What's in the box, or is that reflected in the document somewhere? Like, is that basically the box is what this purple stuff is, right?
Yes. Yeah, the box is just saying that this was added. This is because it's in track changes. So whenever you highlight something, the box will say, what has been added. To your question earlier, Marin is our intern who is helping us get content from submitted versions of this document onto the draft version that we're reviewing.
Okay. So just because that said that Marin added it, but this is actually what Ken had proposed originally, is that what I'm understanding? Okay. And then is it possible, maybe just for like, and I'm sorry, maybe I'm the only one whose brain is just not following this document. Is it possible to just add like a note or like a subhead note, original version here, note, my version starts here, like just so I can kind of, because it looks like I'm reading the same thing over and over and I don't know where to stop and start with the same thing. Does that make sense to anybody else, or am I just really dense on this.
Not a problem at all. I just added
Okay.
original version here. Is that helpful for everyone?
Yeah, it would be really helpful to know where one starts and stops and then where the next one starts and stops.
Sure. There's also the challenge of, you know, even within this quote unquote original version, these topics are then expanded by Ken again into more in-depth content covering the same general material, but just a lot more information. So there's that as well. There's not just Ken's version of this kind of item with arrows pointing of how it'll impact the landfill lifespan, competing with the version that I submitted to try to help kind of go with our conversation. But there's also expanded versions of this same content below, so that there's a few different kind of ways to envision this. Yeah, we've had Sam's hand up. Go for it, Sam.
I'd rather hear from Ken first, and I'm going to make a process suggestion.
Thanks, Sam. Go for it, Ken.
You're on mute, Ken.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I just want to point out that, you know, although the two versions, first of all, I just want to say, I definitely feel your pain, Ginger, you know, about the two different versions. You know, I don't think that's the way it should have been done. So, you know, because it's kind of left of it in this sort of very you know, and anyway, I won't go on about that anymore. What I wanted to say is, though, there isn't a sort of mashing possibility between these two versions. And that's because they kind of take a fundamentally different approach to the same basic dynamic. So in other words, you can't take 3 from the top and 4 from the bottom and put them together. They have different underlying methodologies. And so that would be extremely confusing to the reader to try to, you know, you have to kind of, one of the things about the different versions is you need to place a decision about them. They're organizationally, they're fundamentally different. So for example, the original version talks about, it has a list of things which decrease the longevity of the landfill. Those are in a separate section, whereas the alternate version does not do that. Instead, it goes topic by topic, and it puts both the decrease and increase things in the same, to me, the alternate version is confusing for that reason, because it mashes together things like, well, I'm not going to go into long examples, but the comments which I'm going to be delivering shortly, I'm holding them back depending on the outcome of this meeting, you know, essentially kind of point this out. So this would be pointed out in written detail and kind of line by line. And so I think there is information forthcoming which will enable the members of the subcommittee to kind of better evaluate the two different versions.
Thanks, Ken. And generally, I think Ken really points out the essence of why there's two versions, is that I suggested a totally different way of envisioning this content, and there's no way I could have commented on Ken's version without totally altering it. The whole thing would have been redlined. So I wanted to preserve that and say, look, I like a lot of the style of this, but I think it really needs to be totally rethought. And when you read the document, you'll see that it's actually rooted in the concept of, look, the landfill chooses how much material to bring in. It's not thrust upon them. The landfill says, okay, we can choose how much material to bring in based on the demand. So a lot of what we're talking about is trying to look at demand and how that might relate to the landfill's choice to accept material. That's why there's a landfill tonnage limit that the landfill can enforce, essentially, as they're choosing that material. So what I did is I reframed the document around how I saw the discussions that we were having around these different scenarios. And Ken, I totally see where you're coming from. I don't want it to be confusing. I also was really trying to respect your work by not just redlining the entire thing, because I don't think it would have been fair to you. So we're doing our best here. I think we, just like in the key findings, there's going to be alternate versions of the same type of content. We have a couple hands. Sam, feel free to jump in whenever you want to, but we have Ginger and then Ken.
Yeah, first of all, I'm sorry that I don't know how to work my emoji reactions. I did not mean to applaud or do anything else. I was just trying to raise my hand. I sent a direct message to Ken thinking I had sent it to the entire group, and I did not. So what I'm wondering is, so Ken, Daniel mentioned a minute ago that you had a more expanded version of this material at the end of this document. And I was seeking clarity on whether you were proposing that both be included, what you originally wrote in the blue text that we just discussed, that Daniel has his own version of, and what's below the more detailed version, or if you were anticipating one would replace the other, or one was your preference over the other.
Should I be answering that now, or did Sam want to go?
I think, yeah, feel free.
Oh, okay. So, well, going back in time, if you remember, there was pushback about essentially the expanded, what we're now referring to as the expanded version of these. So what happened was I moved some of the material, the relevant parts of it, into the list that we were developing. So that's why we kind of have this sort of step version. It's really an artifact of the process that we went into, because at certain points in time, it wasn't at all clear that what is on the screen now, the what if scenarios, it wasn't all clear that that was going to actually survive the process. There were people saying that it should be stricken from the record, for example. So that's where that particular artifact comes from. I mean, I'm happy with the way it works organizationally now. I think it works well, in that we have a summary version, which is the what we're calling the original. It has notes in it so that you can drill down to more expanded versions, which are the what if scenarios. And then there are notes in that, which means you can drill down into what is currently in section 4, which is even more expanded. Because if you also remember, there was a lot of pushback in the subcommittee, essentially saying, well, how do we know that these scenarios are viable? Which was really a push to create a lot of documentation, kind of showing exactly where where these ideas came from. It can seem very, when you put forward future scenarios, if you reduce them down to one line, they can seem like, that's not very likely. But if you actually go through the argumentation, looking at what the signals are for those future scenarios, then all of a sudden, you can appreciate them. There's a wider context to really understand them, because a lot of scenarios, of course, kind of rely on the interconnectedness of things rather than the isolation of things. So that's where that's where the content that we have comes from. And to answer your question, I think that they should all remain. I mean, they were all material that I developed in good faith for this, for this document. I'm kind of responding, like Daniel said, to requests that the members of the subcommittee had made. I mean, points that they had raised.
Thanks,
Okay,
Ken.
that's helpful. I appreciate the recap. Thanks.
All right. Any other thoughts before Sam provides his feedback on this? Go for it, Sam.
So there's a lot here. I agree with the process challenges that have been articulated. They are not surprising. We can argue the pros and cons of that. And, you know, I think as I've said before, we can fix blame here or we can fix the problem. And I'm hoping the subcommittee wants to fix the substantive problem, which is what do we do with what we have? I do feel the need to say that the county is not just staff here. They are a participant. And in particular, Daniel is an ex officio member of the work group. So he, like everyone, is free to make his suggestions. With the clarity of 2020 hindsight, could it have been more clearly explained? Sure. But the reality is we are not going to get to as many common understandings as we can give with the document in its current format. The other piece I want to say for clarity is that just from my perspective, my pushback is not on the listing of the various factors with some sense, are they up, neutral, or down? I think that is essential because the suggestion I've been promoting for your consideration is that that work be teed up much like the SMMP work has been teed up and given to the consultant or consultants who are going to do that work and can provide then more objective data to the analyses. So my quote unquote pushback is not only really starts when you get to charts that take these various factors and say, well, if we assume 20%, 40%, 60, whatever the number is, that it is, where are we getting the data to make that assumption? Now, the counter pushback to the pushback has been, well, that's what they're doing in section 1. I think from my perspective, it's substantially different. They are looking at actual things that have happened, and there's a reasonable likelihood that under one baseline scenario, that could continue. Is that the end of the analysis? No. That's why we're listing the other factors and a general sense of as to how they could impact the end of life of the landfill. Finally, the conversation of what is original and what is new, and do we start with one document or the other, isn't going to get us anywhere, folks. Having said all of that, I do think that we've got to have one version of this thing to start with. The thoughts of suggesting everyone go forth and comment version A, B, C, or D. And what are we going to do after we get that? We're still going to be, you're going to be slightly better off than we are now, but we're not going to be better off to the point where we're going to be able to land this plane in 4 meetings if we continue everyone makes track changes here. I don't know how exactly we would do this mechanically, but I am suggesting maybe a subset of the subcommittee sit down and really struggle offline with the various versions and get as much fidelity to them as possible. But to give one well, this is the leader because it simply came first. It's one member's views. It's no different than another member's views. And the goal is to get a subcommittee view. So I'm asking that we consider a process where we can take the competing versions and get something that then becomes the base version to do final track changes. And I'm open to any ideas that are practical and that could work. Thanks for listening.
Go for it, Ken. And then check.
Actually, Chuck, I'll let you go first. Thanks.
Thank you. Just so I could get my head around it, the subcommittee report that's up here now is going to be a subset of the Benton County Talks Trash Committee report, correct? And if it is, yeah, so the consensus here then is just get some uniformity into it that can be, I'll paraphrase a newspaper. The committee report is going to be the front page above the fold, and what's above the fold can drill down to the subcommittee's reports for more information, correct?
Let me try to put focus on this. The 100-page, we have 450 some pages in the overall work group report. The first 100 pages have a section for each of the 5 subcommittees that primarily are focused on key findings and recommendations. Those key findings and recommendations in the 100 pages are then hyperlinked to the appendix, which is the 350 pages, for those people who want to know more about, because they agree or disagree or just interested, a key finding and a recommendation will be able to go to the 351 pages and find their issue. We cannot write all of the findings and recommendations until we get to the stage where the 350-page version is agreed to. So the work that we're talking about here, that's, I'll call it the on the screen work, is you got to get fidelity on that. Otherwise, you know, what are the findings going to say? And so I agree with Ken that we can't just spend all this time on the findings and recommendations at this point of the process, because you got to deal with the part of the process that's on the screen. So I hope that helps, Chuck.
All right. Do you want to take it away, Ken?
Yeah. So if I understood Sam correctly, he's proposing that we have a subcommittee to deal with this particular, issue of these 2 competing versions. And presumably I would be on the subcommittee, and I would kind of go through whatever work the subcommittee is going to go through in order to straighten this out. So there's just a lot of pushback from that. I mean, presumably Daniel will also be on the subcommittee, and he's getting paid to be on the subcommittee, whereas I am not. I came forward, again, I just want to go back. I came forward as a volunteer with a bunch of work, which was reflected in the original document. And so to have that spun, I mean, I can appreciate Daniel saying, well, I didn't want to redline your entire work, but that's kind of glossing over how, again, the etiquette of the committee, the subcommittee has been working up to now, where we don't go in just completely redlining, deleting other people's work and putting in our own in front of it. So there could have been essentially Daniel saying, hey, this seems weird to me to have the organization the way you've got it. Could we consider organizing it differently? That is a conversation that could have been had, and that's what typically has been done in the subcommittee. So rather than essentially pushing down into, additional factors column, there could have been a discussion about, hey, here are my ideas about how this could have been done. That's not what happened. And again, it could have been done as like, hey, we have two different versions of the way this could be organized. That also was not how it was done. It was done in a particular way. And I know that we have talked about, that we don't want to assign blame for this, but I do think that we should talk about how to correct essentially what has been, a disrespectful and asymmetrical, process that we've had. We can correct it. We can rewind time and go back to the original, and Daniel can bring forward the arguments, like the ones that I've been talking about. That's what we can do. And so that is the process that I'm signing on to. But essentially signing on to this sort of reconciliation process, I feel that work that was not in good faith is what is bringing me to essentially have a lot more work ahead of me. And what have I done to deserve that? As a volunteer, why am I doing a bunch more work? So I think all that has to be answered before we just go, oh, well, let's just, crash these two documents together or whatever. That's assuming that essentially I have a lot more time, as a volunteer. And again, I want to go back to, I thought this work group was about essentially listening to the public. It was community led. Don't I recall, Darren talking about that? I seem to remember things. This is not a staff project. This is a public product. Staff is not here to assert their views. I don't feel like those are being honored here. And I know that there's been concern raised by community members in the past, essentially about their material being taken and worked over in ways that they do not approve of, in kind of a disrespectful and asymmetrical way.
Thanks,
So,
Ken.
That's what I
sorry.
got.
Okay, and Chuck.
Well, I submit a lot of information too, but that being said, it's just to be sifted through and organized a little better, because some of the ideas I put in is also from other people too. So it's a shifting process here. And I give credit to Daniel as looking at that too as kind of a clearinghouse, because what he does, if you will, he does look at a wider spectrum than just this subcommittee's work, but also the other subcommittees' work. And for instance, there is some common ground between what our group is working on, going to the from the solid waste part to sustainable part. So I realize not all my ideas will get in the permanent position here, but I look at everything as in good faith, but also in good faith comes trust in other people to sort through it and give some common ground to it and continuity. So Ginger has done that from Republic Perspective 2, bringing forth what their concepts and idea is. So it's not one individual's authorship, it's a collection of authorships that need to bring a story forward, if you will.
Thanks, Chuck. Any other thoughts on this? All right. Well, we have about 24 minutes left of our meeting. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten to get very far in this document. We've had a fair amount of discussion on section 3 and the kind of scenarios. We have a fair amount of work ahead of us, and I'm open to anybody suggesting another location in the document to discuss, or if you have any suggestions on editing this section that are more concrete. Yeah, Sam.
So we cannot kick this problem down the road any further here and go to these other sections. I mean, this is the section that, as Ken accurately says, gets as sort of like the last agenda item, therefore doesn't get its full attention. And you know, we are at a process roadblock here. Ken has made it perfectly clear that he wants to stick with the original, if I'm understanding him correctly, and go with that. I guess I need to hear from the other members of the broad community, which include neighboring jurisdictions, other people that have interests here in this. Republic has an interest in this too, and see how do we get to a document that we can start from. And I just do not think, based on my experience, these kinds of impasses and other processes, that calling the question, do we go with option A or option B as our base, is going to solve the problem. It may have the appearance of efficiency in the moment, but it's not going to get there, because if these are two substantive approaches, and please understand, I have not studied either of them for the reasons that were articulated at the beginning of the meeting. I was confused. So I don't have a preference per se as one, but we've got to figure out what is our next practical step. And let's hear from other folks about what their suggestion is.
I'll just open it up to the floor. Feel free to jump in whenever you want.
Well, now that I have a better understanding of what is in the document in terms of the original, the Daniel, and the expanded, the expanded I remember, Ken, I just didn't realize that was still the same thing. So thank you for clarifying that. I feel like I'm in much better position to go through and evaluate that. And I know Paul had submitted some stuff today that I haven't even had a chance to see. I know Chuck submitted some items that I haven't had a chance to see. I mean, I understand we're down to a real time crunch, but we've spent this entire meeting basically trying to understand the document and then talk about what we're going to do with it. I mean, I would almost recommend we take 48 hours, everybody goes through it, figures out like what they want to say, and then we come back and try to squeeze in another meeting later this week where we can go and decide if we need to have a subcommittee. But I don't think that anybody's really had a chance to look at the document in its entirety and understand who's submitting what. So that's one suggestion I have. I realize that's more work for everybody. I realize that means we have to schedule an extra meeting, but I feel like if we just take this and go straight to the subcommittee level, there's going to be folks who are not on the subcommittee who haven't really had a chance to digest or weigh in what alternatives we have and what should be authored. But open to any thoughts anybody else has.
Well, I'll just say quickly that I agree with Ginger, and especially the idea that we take 48 hours to clarify the written portion so that people can look at that and understand what they're looking at with some clarity. And then, I think it's really in what's written, what, that people can get to a document. So I'm just agreeing with you, Ginger.
I would also agree. I have not had a chance to digest all this either. To be appreciated.
Feel free to jump in. I'm not calling on anyone.
Hey, Daniel, just a quick detailed question here. I want to make sure everybody's on the same page. I thought the latest version was V8. This could be me just losing track of things. Clearly, you're looking at revision 7, which I think is called revision 7 underbar 2 in the document format, in the docx format. But it looks like the document you are actually viewing with your tool is BCTT final report draft 4. Could you just clear that up for me?
Yeah,
If
thanks.
we're going to take 48 hours. What should I be looking at?
Yeah, so this is what I was mentioning earlier. So right now I'm looking at the full workgroup report and how our document is embedded in it. It just makes it easier for me to keep track of all the formatting pieces. Obviously the revision 7 piece hasn't been updated. This is identical to what you saw as version 8. Plus the comments that I've received since you received version 8. So this is, I'll try to update that here. Generally, when I'm reviewing it, you'll see it be on BCTT report draft 4. This is like the next draft in progress so that we're capturing all of the track changes. Thanks for that question, Paul. All right, any other
Just
thoughts?
one additional question I had is if we understand which document we're all working off of, are we all supposed to resubmit a track changes? Do you want us to just keep our own files and come prepared to this next meeting with, like, how do you want us to convey our thoughts so that we're not tripping over each other?
Yeah, thanks, Ginger. I mean, this is the sort of crux of the challenge here. I don't think that anybody, sorry, I don't think that anybody needs to ask the group for permission to send over changes. I think that you can send me your suggestions for changing it, whether that includes new content or edits to somebody else's content. And what I'm going to do is try to track that in this working doc version. The challenge here, and this is why I started the meeting with the goal of trying to accept some of these track changes. The issue here is we have proposed changes like this whole section from Ken. And if we want to add any comments to that, it's not really going to be easily tracked. Like we're not going to be able to easily tell, which track changes is embedded in Ken's track changes. So it's going to get really complicated. I'm going to do my best. Literally every single time somebody comments, I have to make a comment on that saying, hey, this is from Ken. Hey, this is from Chuck. Hey, this is from Paul. So it's going to get really complicated until we can get to the point where we actually talk about this content and say, hey, this is worth saying, okay, we need to accept this track changes so that we can kind of move forward on it. But my suggestion is, if you have any detailed items that you want to include, send it my way. I'll add it to this document before our next discussion so that the group can discuss it. But please come to the discussion prepared to actually talk about that. Say, hey, I want to direct the group's attention to, this section where I added this sentence to Ken's piece. How does that sound to everyone? That's the goal. The issue is not everybody's going to be able to review every suggested change ahead of the next meeting. So you have to kind of make your changes and then be prepared to talk about them with the group. Does that make sense? Any concerns, questions?
Well, it just seems to me like it would be helpful if there were a way in written, when you review the written form of something, for you to just go, this language is fine to me. I accept this language. Rather than making it depend upon a face-to-face meeting. If you could essentially just go, I sign off on this language, whatever. but there doesn't seem to be a provision for that in how we've been dealing with these documents. And that's why all of these changes really begin to pile up.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. Yeah, the issue is, if you send a comment saying, hey, I approve this section, literally every single subcommittee member would have to do that for us to be on the same page. Otherwise, if we're in a discussion, in a live discussion, we say, who has concerns here? Nobody has concerns. Okay, great. Let's accept that track change. I don't see everyone commenting individually on each section and getting consensus that way. I just don't think it's practical. Any other thoughts on how to get consensus on some of these? Yeah, Sam.
Well, I'm thinking out loud. I think that the addition of the verbiage, original version from Ken and so on, is helpful as a note. I am wondering if it's just cleaner and more efficient. So right there at the bottom 173 and all through where it says Ken's original condition, you just accept those, because we now know, and you can say pages 173 to, whatever it is, 185 are Ken's. They've been accepted, so that then the editing of them can be cleaner. Otherwise, we have track changes on track changes. So mechanically, I'm just thinking that, we now know that, clearly this is from Ken, this is from Chuck, this is from whomever. At this point, it's not about the authorship, because it's got to be our product, meaning the subcommittee's product. The question is the content agreeable or not? And then we don't have to get caught up on who said what and have all these bullets out to the side, which are just making this task, frankly, impossible from my view. But this way, we at least have more clarity as to what are the key issues. Reactions to that just very narrow process, man, how do we manage the document suggestion? Makes sense, nonsense.
Sam, to be clear, you're suggesting that what Daniel do is go in and take out all the redlining and just accept the changes for the text as is, and then we comment on that anew. So because we haven't agreed to anything yet. So I just want to make sure I understand what you're proposing.
So all I'm trying to do is design a process that mechanically will work. And the problem I'm sensing is we've got track changes and attributions and all that, which is great for fidelity, and it's a great historical document. But I'm suggesting that the document that is commented upon and edited in the next 48 hours be a clean version, because then you can say, regardless if it's been accepted or not, I like it or I would change it, and here's my actual change, and then they pop off the screen, right?
I'm certainly willing to try that. I do think there will be a challenge, and maybe we're not talking about doing this part yet, but I just want to clarify with the findings, because I know I submitted one version of findings. I believe Ken has revised or added a couple of findings. I know Paul has grouped findings together. So are we just talking about the section where we have like competing versions, or are we talking about the entirety of the document? Because I don't know that what you're proposing will work specifically for the findings, but perhaps that comes at the end anyway, so it doesn't matter.
So I am suggesting that we not do it for the findings now, for the reasons you just stated. It comes at the end, because we can't write a finding unless we've gotten fidelity or infidelity. I almost said infidelity in the body of the report. So I am really suggesting, even narrower, that it really is what I think is called section 3. It may include a section 4. I'm lost track without having the paper in front of me. And that's all Daniel sends you, is that, because that's the piece that we have the most yucca over here. And we'll pick up the findings next week. So how far does this section go down, Ken? And what from pages what to what do you think is, the stuff that we need to deal with for these quote unquote events and factors for potential impact section?
I'm sorry, were you asking me?
Yeah, if you have a better handle, it seems like you.
Well, I think it applies to kind of everything in section 3. Section 4 hasn't really been commented on. So I think that's just going to, be what it is. It's really section 3, all the material in section 3. And in particular, it's the stuff at the beginning of section 3 where, in some versions, there are like 3 different versions of the projection. They're just, yeah, I think when I've seen those sorts of documents, what track changes has been used for is to show what new suggestions are coming forward. So when you look at the document, the track changes will show you what has been changed since the previous version. And so the people who have been writing herd on those documents, typically at the end of a session, they'll just accept all the changes that have been made, once there's been a chance to hear on those, and then they put that draft out, and then when there are with track changes on, etc. So each time you're looking at the document, you're just looking, the things that are highlighted by track changes are just the new things, and so that appears to me to be the kind of the step in the process that has been missing here. I'm just backing up kind of what you're talking about here, Sam. That there isn't a process by which changes that get proposed get accepted once they've had a hearing.
Thank you both. Yeah, I think my main concern and the challenge here is we don't talk a lot about content in this group. For example, there's been a fair amount of proposed edits in between meetings that you haven't seen yet. These are things that I've plopped in the document to capture for our discussion today that we have not and almost certainly will not discuss today. That if I accept track changes, you're going to be surprised about what's in this document because we haven't had a chance to discuss it. And generally, we talk a lot about process in this group and not about content. So I think that's one of the challenges is we're not actually talking about the content of the document. We end up talking a lot about, how the document should be approached. So I don't want to lose that.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I completely understand that point. I know that there's a bunch of material I haven't read, but at this point, I kind of think that if we're just going to focus in on section 3 and we're all in agreement that that's where we have to start in terms of making progress, track changes on everything that's been put into that piece. It doesn't matter to me if I've never read it before or surprised, because then I can go through and I can X out or I can comment on whatever I don't like, right? But I feel like we are so bogged down with like 80 pages of, in some ways, repetitive or competing information that if we don't start clean with everything that's been submitted so far, we're going to be constantly backtracking. And I think everybody who is on this subcommittee is just going to have to recognize that they're going to be looking at some brand new material. And that doesn't mean that we've accepted it, but it gives us a clean slate to start.
That was the motivation for this. There's no assumption of acceptance. We're just trying to get a document that is editable, subject to being edited with everything, and then we have the meat and potatoes conversation, which has to be on what all of you, the subcommittee, not any 1 or 2 or 3 members, the common understandings has always been the goal, and it's got to focus on the substance here.
I also would propose, and I'm not saying that this is something that we look at in the next 48 hours, because I know there's already going to be a big burden on Daniel and staff to try to like get this one section 3 track change so we can look at it. But I think it would be very helpful if we went, if staff or somebody could go through the document, take all the variations of the findings and recommendations and put those together in one place. So if we have finding 25 written 4 different ways, I want to see it 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't care who wrote it, but let me see what's out there so I know what I'm looking at. Because with Paul submitting groupings and Ken submitting, and then I've gone to our legal department, like I don't know where to even start working from that. And so I think once we have the section 3, at least, where we can all comment on it and start from the same place, we need to organize the various versions of the findings so that one person isn't looking at the wrong document and somebody else is looking at this one over here. Because I think that's going to be a real key piece that will help us pull together. And if I'm looking at section 3, of which the findings are derived, if I can reference the findings back and forth to what's in section 3, that helps me provide clarity, and understanding and comprehension as well.
Thanks, Ginger. Yeah, that I mentioned that earlier too. That was sort of Paul's suggestion as well, that the findings are grouped together, and I started going through that effort of trying to find all the versions of very similar content so we can essentially compare them side by side and figure out which should be kept, which one should be deleted, what should be altered.
I didn't know you were already on it.
Yeah, it's not in the draft that you have. These are fresh suggestions from Paul that I started incorporating today. So
let me try this.
If Ian or Mark had anything they wanted to add, because I know that, certainly Ken and I, and to, some extent, Chuck and Paul have been dominating the conversation here.
So I want to summarize what I think the emerging, if not agreed to, process plan is. Step 1, Daniel cleans up section 3 and sends it out, hopefully today. I don't know what else is on his plate. We'll fine tune it. And we have, 2 days, 48 hours, if that makes a difference, to everyone to track change that. Then Daniel merges them together into one document. So we're not looking at 5 different Word documents, but all the changes are in one document. That gets sent out. Then we have a meeting. I'm really sorry to say, but I'm suggesting it be this week, and see how far we can get with that approach. In the period of time after Ken has sent, after Daniel has sent it out, he then turns his attention to a new merged version of the key findings and recommendations. And they are grouped like this. Finding 13, it's on X topic. And 13A, B, C, and D, if there are 4 different versions floating out there. They don't need to be attributed to anyone. And then that happens after we have this, making this up on the fly, our Friday meeting. That's the schedule that works to people. Reactions, thoughts, fine tuning. So I think that's what we're going to do, hearing some applauses, some thumbs up, and silence. I'm interpreting the silence as that makes sense, unless you say otherwise.
We have a hand from Mark.
Thanks, Daniel. So just I've been listening in. I'm currently, I got the crud, so I'm kind of just sort of paying attention, but not really participating very actively, and I'm sorry about that. I'm wondering, as we talk about the process suggestion that Sam just made, rather than 4 or 5 of us all working individually on separate versions, can't we do this on Google Drive where we're all working on the same document? Is there some, I mean, I really can't imagine that most teams are doing this way. Is there a way that we can put it up and we all work off the same document and there's one version?
I can answer that. No, we just don't, we can't use Google Drive from a county hosted document. So unfortunately, it just wouldn't really work with what technology infrastructure we have, unfortunately. I definitely hear you. I would love for that to be an option. But unfortunately, that's our tech limitations.
All right, so this I know is tech blasphemy here, but is it, is there some problem with one of us hosting that Google document, all working on it, and then downloading the final version after we've gotten the 6 or 7 people's comments, and then giving it to you to upload on your website? I mean, are they that? And I get it. After being Zoom bombed a couple of weeks ago, I get the concern, but Mark's idea just makes so much sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if somebody else is hosting the document and inviting folks to it, I don't think there's limitations there. Yeah, it's just it can't be hosted by the county.
So Mark, I'm assuming that you are willing to host this document, because I don't have Millie here today, and my ability to do that is best described with the word none.
and that would be the way that I would describe my ability. I'm just brainstorming ideas for trying to figure out a way to do this so that we're not all working individually, that we're working on the same document. So I'm not I don't have any ability to do the Google Drive thing. I don't know if Ken or Paul or Ginger or somebody has. I'm just me. And I don't know how to do it. I've done it. I've participated in things where we're working on the same thing. That's why I brought it up, but I don't know how that would be done.
My only other suggestion with this, just having coordinated with public meetings and a lot of folks working on the similar documents, is with shared documents like that. If somebody submits a change and somebody else deletes it, it's just gone. It's not captured. You don't have any control over what, submission that you had. And
I see.
especially, the county will have nothing to do with that. There will be no, we can't help with those issues as they crop up, if they crop up. So this is one warning that, those sort of things might happen, especially on a proposed change that isn't finalized yet.
I just want to say that I do have the ability to host a Google document, but I think I'm just seen as too partisan. So I think it would be a good idea for me not to do that.
I certainly don't feel that way about you hosting it. I'm more concerned about the issue Daniel just said, that if subcommittee member A does a track change, then subcommittee member B comes on 2 minutes later and undoes it, that we don't have what I'm hoping to have, which is everyone's comments in one place. That's, to me, more of the concern.
I agree. I agree. That's a concern.
Yeah, that would be my issue. It doesn't matter to me who hosts it, and I certainly have no problem with Ken or anybody else doing so. But I would be very concerned, even if it was accidental, like if 2 people are in the document at the same time and somebody overwrites, and feelings could get hurt, and then we've lost part of the the window and the collaboration. So that'd be my only concern.
So it looks like, go ahead, Ken.
Well, I just say I don't want to geek out too much, but I'm not sure that this problem is actually strictly a problem, because I think Google Docs takes a snapshot as you go along. So if person A came in and put in a change, it would be available, because that essentially that version would be, you know, it's not like it's readily accessible. You have to kind of go back through the versions. But if someone said, hey, what happened to my thing? You could go back and you could go, oh, you know, see right here, Ken deleted it, you know, 4 minutes later, whatever. But I'm still, you know, I appreciate the votes of confidence in me, but I'm also not sure exactly how much you know, I've put so much into this subcommittee already, you know. Again, I don't feel like this is exactly my problem. So I'm not willing to step forward to be the solution. You know, I'm happy if someone else is, but I'm not willing to do it myself.
Well, Millie will be in tomorrow morning at Dark 100. I mean, I can have her do it, but I don't like the idea of seeing something you type disappear and having to go back several versions to find it out, because it's just not very efficient, and it loses the ability for everyone else to look at the document and say, oh, I see I have two alternative things here. I like B, you know, better than A, or here's my proposed C, which is a combo of A and B. So I think what we're, you know, it may be that we're stuck with, and Daniel, tell me how this works, is that each person does this separately. They send everyone, you know, their version, and then you or your intern, unfortunately, have to do that combined doc feature in Word that then hopefully shows the alternative versions for everyone. Is that doable as a practical tech matter?
Yeah, the combined versions hasn't worked for us. I think I don't know. I don't exactly know why it's not like meshing well. So it's sort of a manual process for us. We're essentially copying and pasting material, which is why it comes up as Daniel added or deleted and Marin. So I apologize for that. I'm trying to capture it in comments as best as I can. But certainly, I mean, like we've been doing, we're happy to capture it. We would also be capturing the documents submitted by each individual in the subcommittee page like we've been doing. So, you know, if Paul submits recommended changes on a version, Paul's document would be on there for reference, so you can see that as an individual. But yeah, we're happy to do it, but that merging probably, it just hasn't worked so far. It's been removing too much content. But yeah, we can do our best from a manual task. I see Chuck's hand as well.
I just wanted to comment whether you use Google or whether methodology. Deleting is one thing, which is mischievous in my estimation, but striking through it is another thing. And when you strike through it, that starts a thinking process. If I was the author, I want to know the reasonings, if you will, why you struck through it, because that starts a conversation then, something I did not see. So like the Google, if Google document does that, if it's deleted, it's one thing, but if it's struck through, and then I can respond back, what's your idea here, or what's your comment here? It's one thing to strike it out and put a glittering generality there. It's another idea, strike it out and says, there's another perspective here. Do you see what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Well, I think we've arrived at the fact that we're just going to have to muck through the mechanics of it. And I think the mucking begins, as I indicated, that Daniel puts together a clean version of it. You'll still have the dirty version of it. And it might be helpful to send both to people in the same email, saying, here's the one is the clean version, here's the dirty version, so you can look at them if you have any questions and don't have to go to the website or some other email or what have you.
Sorry, I just wanted, I'm not super comfortable with having a clean version and a messy version. this is the issue that we ran into that Paul had emailed folks about. Essentially, I don't want there to be two different versions floating around there. I want, if we're going to accept track changes on section 3, that has to be the working document, because I have to be able to go back and add those changes. Like, it's very, if people are adding changes to a clean version, for me to incorporate those changes back into the messy version, which is our working document, is very difficult. If we're going to accept track changes in section 3, let's just agree as a group saying everything that's currently in section 3 that was on my screen currently, not version 8 that you're seeing, that's accepted, and then we're moving forward. But we have to be comfortable with that, because I can't juggle two different messy and clean versions. It won't work, and people won't be comfortable with the outcome. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, don't be sorry. We're just trying to struggle with a practical problem. I am not suggesting, in fact, we'd have to have a rule that no one touches the dirty version. It is simply, you can PDF it and just make it as a reference for people if they're curious, was my idea. But if that's going to create too many problems, I mean, we can only edit the clean version. But if it's too complicated, I happily stand down.
So Daniel, is the PDF of version 8 a reasonable way to go back and look at the more complicated, dirty version of this?
Yeah, I think the PDF or the Word version of version 8 would be more or less a good way to capture this. I think maybe, Ken, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you added any suggestions for section 3 in the last kind of section of comments that you made, I think Chuck might have made one addition to section 3. So that could be a good reference point, but I'm wary of losing that, and I know there's stuff that you haven't really had a chance to review yet.
If you're asking me, I think all the things that I've sent you to date are reflected in version 8.
Okay.
I have a comment going already on version 8, which I'll send you, shortly after this is over, based upon, kind of what we've been talking about here. So that's going to arrive soon. Yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess we can talk about, do we, if before we get this out, do you want me to add like comments like from Ken that's already kind of in progress? Do you want me to add it and accept it so that everyone's working from a clean version, even if it's stuff that you haven't really had a chance to see yet? Is that okay with the group? Yeah.
I think that's what Ginger was talking about, the 48 hours, right? To kind of compile everything to get that together. It sounds like a necessary step at this point.
Yeah. Okay. No, I mean, that works for me too. And I think the key is that it's not final, right? The point of having this talk to go back to that kind of clean content is to make edits. So we're just accepting the track changes. I think it looks scarier than it is in practicality.
I think the only request that I would have is if Ken has something that he's already started that is in progress, or if anybody else on this subcommittee does, that they get that to Daniel, like by, I don't know, 3 p.m., 5 p.m. today, whatever it is, so that Daniel can get that document out to us and we can have as long as possible in that 48-hour window to review anything. So like, if you haven't started something, don't start anything until you get the new document. If you have, try to wrap it up quickly so that we can get something in our hands that we can all look at. That would be my only request. Thanks.
So let's go backwards in time. Should we meet on Friday? Because it's already, Tuesday at whatever. And so, it's, if things aren't getting to Daniel till 5, then, he's got the planning commission meeting tonight. Wednesday night is the SWAC DSAC meeting. In a perfect world, Daniel gets us this clean version, by noon tomorrow. And then you guys have time to look at it and make your comments. If we're going to meet on 5, that means we have to pick a time. We have to pick a time that for you to get these changes back so Daniel can combine them and send them out before our Friday meeting, so you can all see everyone's stuff. So let's start with I think the threshold issue. Do we need to meet on Friday?
What time on Friday?
Well, we'll figure out. I mean, it's just is that day generally
Okay.
a meaningful target?
When you say,
Yes, we need to meet on Friday. We
Yeah,
have too little time to put this off until our next regularly scheduled meeting. That's my view.
right. So what do I see in the chat? At least looks like Ginger said, can meet between 9 and 12 Pacific on Friday. So who can meet then? We'll figure out the exact time, but who can meet then between 9 and 12? So Paul and can, Mark can. Brian, what's your dance card look like?
Between 9 and 10:30, 11-ish.
Okay. So let's do 9 to 11. I think I think we should do 2 hours because we have to focus on the merits. So 9. So that means on Thursday, I'm thinking out loud, Thursday at noon, you have your comments back to Daniel. So he has Thursday afternoon to mush them together into one combined thing and sends it out by close of business on Thursday. So you have it. And then we'll hit the ground running 9 o'clock on Friday.
Does that give folks enough time to review it between Thursday night and Friday morning, or should we push that to Wednesday? Like send me your edits by. I guess I just want to make sure I'm understanding the idea and how much time folks need.
when you say version 8, is that the big enchilada or is that just number A1? When you say version 8.
So I'm suggesting, Chuck, you don't have to worry about that because he's going to send you an email, all of us an email that says this attachment is the way, the truth, and the light. And it could be whatever number, but that's the only one you are going to be editing.
Okay, I'll accept it as the epistemology then. Thank you.
Yes. It'll be some of it. The first letter on each page will be in color
So Daniel, my inclination is to say, get your edits in sooner. Let's try to cut things off quicker so that you can get your work done so that we could start reviewing tonight. And then we'd have essentially a day and a half, right?
Yeah, if you have edits in progress now, I think if it's possible to get them in by like 3, I can get those out to you today, and then you'll have all that time until 9 a.m. on Friday to review it, if that works for everyone.
no, wait.
I can definitely get my edits in today. I would prefer 5 rather than 3, but I agree that more time for people to review the document is more important than people to get their edits in. So I'm happy to kind of expedite on the getting the edits in part in favor of review time.
So this isn't in disagreement with that, but again, I think what has to happen is the combined version of all your edits that we are discussing Friday morning at 9 should go out at least by Thursday at noon, so you can read everyone's comments, not just your own. So there's this other step here that I thought, Daniel, that I wasn't getting. It's not my image that at 9 o'clock you put on the screen the combined edits that we're all seeing for the first time.
Yeah.
People need time to review them. So we hit the ground running with that. That's the missing step.
Okay. Yeah, I hear you. So we have two pieces. We have the work. Sorry, I'm recognizing that we're over time. So we have the two pieces, the work in progress comments that we mentioned earlier, getting that to me the sooner the better, so I can incorporate that into the clean version, right? Then folks are going to review the clean version and send edits back to me to compile into one document. Then I will send it back out to folks Thursday night, so you have a chance to at least have a little bit of time with that before we meet on Friday at 9.
Exactly.
Okay. How does that sound to everyone? I'm seeing some thumbs up. Okay, so the first deadline for just current edits to make it into the clean copy is 5 today. And I'll do my best to get that out. I'll say to 5:30 or something so we can get those in there. Then we'll give you time. What should be that Thursday deadline? Does Thursday at 3 or 3:30 work for folks, so I can get those combined and back to you by around Thursday at 5? Is that enough time? I'm seeing some
Yeah.
thumbs up. Okay. Okay, excellent. So I'll outline this in the email I send for the invite for Friday morning at 9 a.m. Thank you all. Thank you all for
Good stuff. Thank you.
having this conversation. Yep.
If I can just say one more thing. Could we have Zoom with passwords rather than registering first?
Yeah,
It's the way it's more commonly done.
Yeah, we just got a update from IT that required the registration. So that's what we're working with after our latest Zoom issue on the work group meeting. I'm sorry, we had to add that recently. So until we get more guidance from IT, I'll keep you updated.
Sure, it's just passwords is better, from the perspective of the public.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, we try to lean as accessible as possible. That's been my approach this whole time. But yeah, right now it's essentially a password and a registration combo. So I'm sorry about that.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
All right.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone. Take care.